Today I'm going to show you how to put responsive columns into a web page you're creating in Elementor. Okay, so I've got a blank page open up here in Elementor, and I do have my header and my footer here, but that's just a template that's going to be on everything I do. So right now I'm going to actually create 3 columns in Elementor. 3 containers here. Let me just duplicate. Okay, now I've got a container with 3 containers. I go in here, make the direction horizontal. I have 3 columns. And if I make each of these containers a different color, so 3 columns, looks great. But what happens when I go to tablet mode? Still got 3 columns, right? If I go to mobile, it goes to 1 column. Well, what if I wanted it to be 4 columns on desktop, 3 columns on tablet, and then 2 columns on mobile? Well, we got to do a little bit of work. It's real easy though, but I'm going to show you how to do responsive columns now. We're going to start over. We're going to actually use a little bit of CSS, and we're going to use something called media queries in our CSS. And that's going to tell our browser, okay, if the width, the viewport width is a certain amount, then we're going to display 3 columns. If it's a certain amount, we're going to display 2 columns. You're putting in a little bit into the code telling it, this is how I want these columns to display. And it's super easy. And I'm going to have the code below so you can do it yourself. So what I'm going to do first, before I do anything else, is I'm going to go into my page settings here and under advanced, and I'm going to add some custom CSS for the page. The reason I'm going to do it here is if I do it for an individual element, it may only hold true for that element. It's not going to hold for everything. I want this to be universal. Now, if you're new to CSS, the way CSS works is you basically define a variable. It's a class or an ID. We're going to do classes in this sense. You can create your own name and everything for it. It just needs to be something that makes sense. And you put a period before it to define it as a class. And then you put a list of attributes that you want that class to have. And then what we're going to do after that is, once we've created our classes and decided what we want them to look like, then we're going to go assign that class to our columns in Elementor. Let's call it a responsive column, or respColumn for me, and I like to do camel case because I'm old school. All right, and then I'm going to do a bracket there. So you see, notice how I have the period here. I create a bracket, automatically creates the closing bracket. This whole statement here, everything I put in it is going to apply to respColumn. Let's define the 4 columns across to get started. We're going to set the width. What's 100 divided by 4? 25%, right? So we're going to set it to 25%, because that basically means that you're going to have 4 in a row if you can fit 25%. And then we're going to make sure we set this to float. This is going to put things right next to each other. So if you want to get a little fancy, what we can do is let's actually make that 22%. And then we'll put a margin of 1%. If we really want to be fancy, we can say margin left 1% and margin right 1%. All right. And 1% plus 1% equals 2%. So we got an extra percentage there. So 1 plus 1 plus 23 equals 25. Let's add a container in. And that container, I'm going to give it that same color I did before so I can see it a little bit better. And under advanced, under here, and I'm going to set CSS class to response column. Look, see what happened? It's only became 25% of what it was before. So if I duplicate this, now I have 4 across. I can publish this and take a look just to make sure. There we are, 4 little columns. Are really short. But just because it looks good in Elementor doesn't mean it's actually going to look good on the real thing. So there you go. So let's go back in here. Let's duplicate this until we have 12 of them. What is happening? We want it to only be 4 across, but we've got 8, right? That's not what we want. So we got to fix a couple things here in Elementor to make that work. All right, so let's go back in here. We're going to set it to wrap, and now let's try that again. Now this looks a little bit better, but wait a minute, we've got only 3 columns and not 4. We wanted 4, right? That's why we made it 25%. 25% is 1/4. So let's go back over here. Let's do a couple other little things to make this work. Here, we need to set things back to their defaults. So over here under gaps, let's make sure that that is set to 0. Oh, now we're looking a little better. And over under advanced, let's make sure that our margins are set to 0 and our padding is set to 0. Looks a little better, right? We can add some things in here to give it a little bit of space. And because we already have a class applied to this, it would make sense that we do that over in our CSS. We're gonna go back into our settings, page settings, go under advanced here, and let's do a little bit of margin on the bottom. Let's not do percentages this time, let's do 2 pixels. See what happens there? We get a little bit of space. See what happens if I make it 50 pixels? See? Bigger, more space. But let's be modest here. Let's do 20 pixels. That looks good. Okay. Now, the problem is, what happens when I go over to tablet? Well, I've still got 4 columns across on all of those, and I want it to actually responsively move. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back into my settings here, and I'm gonna do what's called a media query. Now, media queries are the way that we basically say, okay, if the window is a certain width, do this. If it's not, then you go back to the default, which is what we have up here. We're gonna figure out what the width should be for a tablet. It says up to 1024, that's our default here. So that's great. So let's set it so that we have 3 columns on our tablet view. So we're gonna do something really funky here called a media query. And again, the code is down below. At media, screen, and max width 1024 pixels. All right. So basically it's saying if the maximum width is 1024, which is this tablet, then do this. And I'm going to just copy all of this here from this other class description. Because we need to divide things by 3, we're going to do 1/3, right? Instead of 1/4. 1/3 is 33% and a third and a third. It's not exact. It's never going to be exact. We're just going to get it as close as we can. So now let's do the width of, let's say, 31%. And then the margin left is 1%, 1%. That adds to 33%. Looking pretty good. All right. Now for the test, did it work right? And look, yes. Now we have 3 columns. On desktop, we have 3 rows of 4, and on tablet we have 4 rows of 3. Let's make it so on mobile we have 2 columns. All right, by default in Elementor it's always going to be 1. So let's go back into here, into advanced, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to copy this whole thing again. And over here it's up to 767. So I'm going to change out this number to 767. Now, technically, I don't need to include the margin bottom again or the margin left or right again because it's already up here and it's going to like trickle down. But for the purposes of illustration, I'm just going to duplicate all of these numbers here. The only one that really changes is the only one you need, which is this width here. Okay, so 1/2 equals 50%. Let's make this, we've got 50% minus 2, right? So 48%. Look at that, isn't that beautiful? Now we have 2 columns. Let's publish that. Let's just take a look. I can do something under developer mode. I can go and take and see if it's gonna look all right. So let's go into developer tools. There we go. 12, pixel 7, all looks good. Let's look at an iPad Pro. Looks good, everything looks like it's supposed to. All right, so it's working. It's working. So now you can put things in these columns and trust that it's gonna look good on every device and you can control your columns. You just have to do a little bit of math. It's super easy. Code's below. I hope this was helpful. Take care.
And be sure to like and subscribe.